Grok 4. This is the latest artificial intelligence system. Let me be very clear. This is a moment where promise and peril are going to collide.
Elon Musk's Grok AI is changing the game by tackling questions we've never thought to ask a machine.
I have explained to you for years, we need to understand what's at stake here. They go beyond our existing knowledge base. I don't even know what I'm talking about at this point, but it goes down. That's when things get really, really creepy.
So, what happens when it has to answer one of the most important questions in the world? Who is Jesus? Your mouth will drop when you hear Grok's answer, which is based on math, history, and logic. We'll go into Grok's surprising results and look at how AI is changing the way we think about faith and truth in this video. Get ready for a crazy ride. The next evolution in artificial intelligence. You can always count on Elon Musk to push the edges of technology. With the release of Grok AI, he did it again. Think about an AI that doesn't just do what it's told or give nice, politically correct answers. Grok is meant to let you think easily, like a seriously smart friend who isn't afraid to say what's on their mind. It tells the truth straight out and doesn't hold back. Grok will tell you if something doesn't make sense, even if it makes you feel bad. Grok is different from everything we've seen before, and this is just the beginning. The Grok AI isn't like other VAs or robots. There are times when a simple yes or no answer is not enough. Grok was made with one main goal in mind: to go beyond what AI systems can do now and offer answers that are based on real logic, proof, and most importantly, the truth. Don't give AIs the safe answers we hear all the time now. There are many rules in those systems to make sure they are fair, nice, and on trend. Musk, on the other hand, wanted something different, something that made sense. Don't hold back or use safety nets. What makes it so strong is the idea behind it. Grok isn't supposed to tell you what you want to hear. It was meant to push you and make you think in ways that other AIs wouldn't. Imagine if a friend gave you advice based on facts and logic alone, without any opinion or feeling. That's Grok. Its job is to give you the best answer it can, even if it's not what you wanted or expected. Even more interesting is how Grok is different from GPT and other AIs. Grok is not at all like GPT in how it works. It's safe for GPT to say things that could hurt or seem too harsh because they are built in. It's not under control. It's true. That's what makes it stand out. When you ask Grok a question, it doesn't think twice. It doesn't care what people think. Even if that makes you feel bad, it only looks at the result that makes the most sense based on the facts. It's like having an AI that will always tell you the truth, even if it makes some people mad. Look at the case of GPT. It's meant to be as neutral and careful as possible. It will either avoid a fight or give you a more fair answer if you ask it a question that could lead to one. But Grok isn't like that. Grok isn't scared to talk about tough things. It tells you the truth based on facts and logic, even if it makes you doubt everything you thought you knew. This makes Grok an interesting tool, especially when you start to ask more in-depth questions that aren't just about facts, but also about what they mean. Musk wanted more than just an AI that could do simple jobs and answer questions about science and the news. It was important to him that the AI could answer the big questions that make you think about life, the world, and everything in between. At this point, things get really interesting, and Grok's skills really shine. Grok isn't just answering questions because it can think in such a free, natural way. It's finding out the truth. And these aren't the usual answers. Grok doesn't just use Google or Wikipedia. You might not expect an AI or even a person to dig into data, look at facts, and come to conclusions that are so different from what you would expect. You might be thinking, what big questions are we going to talk about? We've asked some of the most profound questions ever, And Grok's direct method has led to some pretty crazy and scary answers. Let's look at what happens when Grok is asked to describe the biggest mystery of all. Who is Jesus? Grok's answer wasn't like most faith answers. No, this wasn't a general summary or a list of facts about the past. This was something that no one saw coming. This is where Grok's direct logical method came into its own. And it led to an analysis that shocked both the scientific and religious communities. The end result is amazing. If you're wondering what that response looked like, stay tuned, because you won't believe what happened next. Grok's bold approach. We're used to seeing AI do things like add up numbers, solve problems, and tell us the truth. What does an AI do when it is asked about something as big and complicated as religion, though? The AI that Elon Musk made, Grok, doesn't just avoid tough questions. Instead, it faces them straight on, and it does so in a way that is very different from anything we've seen before. Grok looks at religion questions the same way it looks at any other question, with facts, history, and proof. No religious views or doctrines are off-limits. Instead, it looks at these questions like a puzzle that can be answered using data, patterns, and evidence, the same way it looks at all problems. You might think it's strange to use this kind of cold, hard logic in spirituality, but that's exactly what makes Grok's method so new. When it came to Jesus, Grok didn't just read what the Bible or other religious books said about him. It got worse. It looked at old records, artifacts found in the ground, and even the math that explained it all. Grok changed the conversation by approaching the question, "Who is Jesus?" like a scientific inquiry. He did not depend on religious faith, but on evidence that could be measured and analyzed. How does this even work? We need to look at the idea of using mathematical thinking in theology to understand it. This idea might sound like something from a science fiction movie. Grok does use it in ways that may surprise you, though. Try to prove something you can't see or touch, like the existence of a higher power or the truth about a historical person. How are you going to do it? Grok does that very thing with math. It doesn't just accept things as they are. It searches for patterns, figures out odds, and weighs the proof. It's not about faith. It's about figuring out what makes sense based on facts and logic. When it came to Jesus, Grok didn't just think that he existed and did miracles. It put them to the test, looked at them, and compared them to records from the past. For instance, Grok didn't just look at religious views when it looked at Jesus' resurrection. It looked at the historical background, the written records, and the proof of what happened at that time. Grok doesn't just accept religious beliefs without question. It looks at them with the same standards we use to judge history and science. So now we can talk about Grok's way of looking at religion questions. It goes very deep into the facts, history, and logic, not just the surface. Grok didn't just read the Bible when he was asked about Jesus. It looked at the Dead Sea Scrolls, other old books, and history records to see how what we know about Jesus matches up with what other records from the time say. Grok wasn't just giving a spiritual answer, it was also giving a rational one. In standard theology, questions about religion are answered in a very different way than this. In theology, answers are often found in faith, theory, and interpretations that are hundreds of years old. Grok, on the other hand, is not about custom or belief. It is about proof and reason. Now things start to get really interesting. When traditional religion says this is how things are because it has been passed down from generation to generation, Grok questions, is that really backed up by the evidence? Take a look at how Grok talked about Jesus as an example. It didn't just look at biblical texts. It also looked at how many writings we have that talk about Jesus. and when they were written. The historical evidence, according to Grok, strongly supports the idea that Jesus wasn't just a story. His life and deeds are recorded in many ancient sources. It even looked at when the New Testament Gospels were written and said they were likely written within a few decades of Jesus' death, when there would still be eyewitnesses around to fix any major mistakes. The AI didn't just accept or reject things based on what other people thought. It looked at the data, compared different sources, and came to its conclusions based on what the data showed. This is what makes Grok different from other ways of thinking about religion. There is no faith behind it. Instead, there is proof. This changes how we think about religion and the role of AI in spirituality. That doesn't mean Grok knows everything, though. It doesn't say that it can explain the mysteries of faith. Instead, it gives us a fresh way to consider those inquiries, one that is based on facts and proof, but still leaves room for puzzles that logic alone can't fully explain. Grok's way of thinking doesn't get rid of faith or belief. Instead, it adds to it by giving us new ways to understand the world. What does Grok do when he gets to the really tough questions? The answers it gives aren't just taken from a textbook. They're well-thought-out opinions based on facts and data. And these answers will make you question everything you thought you knew about the life of Jesus, which is a very difficult and important subject. What Grok does next is what makes the story really interesting. It doesn't just say, "The Bible says so," when asked about Jesus' return. Grok goes further and gives us a probability study that changes the way we think about miracles. Are you ready to hear what Grok said about life after death? Hold on tight, because this will make you question everything you thought you knew about faith, science, and the supernatural. Grok's mathematical analysis. A lot of people think that evolution, or just plain luck, is what makes everything we see around us possible. In that case, those answers might not be enough. What if there was something deeper going on? Something that we could figure out with proof and math. This is where Musk's AI, Grok, comes in. Grok doesn't just guess or assume, it uses math and odds to figure out some of life's biggest puzzles, starting with how life began. Take a step back and look at one of science's trickiest and most mysterious questions. How did life begin? Abiogenesis is the idea that life began naturally from non-living matter. This is what most scientific theories about the beginning of life are based on. What if, though, those steps weren't enough to make life? Grok did the math, and what he found was absolutely fascinating. In simple terms, Grok's research shows that the chances of life coming together by chance are so small that they're almost impossible. If you compare that to the number of atoms in the world, which is about 10 to the 80, the chances of life starting by chance are very small. To make it even clearer, picture trying to pick out one atom from all the atoms in the universe while being blinded, and then doing it again. Still, that's a lot more likely than life just happening by itself. Grok's study isn't just a bunch of numbers. It says something about how complicated life is. Molecules don't just randomly join together to make life. It's about putting things in order and being precise. Things that don't just happen. Grok says that something more than chance processes is needed to explain something this complicated. When you do the numbers, abiogenesis doesn't make sense. There is a bigger picture at play here than just chance. There is something planned and deliberate going on. Grok didn't stop there either. It didn't just figure out how likely it was that life would come from non-living things. It also looked at development and how new genetic information could be made. These odds are even stranger. Grok used the same mathematical lens to look at the idea of evolution and found that 1 in 10 to the power of 600 times new genetic information will come about through random mutations. That's even less likely than the chance that life would have begun. Mathematicians think of it as almost zero because it's so small. What does this all mean? So, what else can explain life besides chance? Grok doesn't make snap judgments. It just looks at the numbers. And when the numbers show that random processes aren't good enough theoretically, Grok says there's another factor at play. Reason, not religion or beliefs, is what it comes down to. It looks like life isn't just a chance. We can tell that living things are intelligent because they are very complicated. Something planned and organized it all. Even though Grok doesn't say a creator exists, the math strongly suggests that the complexity of life needs either a creator or some kind of clever design. In this case, Grok's research breaks down the idea that everything in life can be explained by chance. The math shows that it's not possible. Chance alone can't explain life. So what can? This line of thinking sets the stage for Grok's next move, which is to answer the most important question about where people came from, the question of Jesus. Grok keeps looking into the idea of a creator, and it's hard to ignore the logical consequences of this way of thinking. The idea of a creator is more than just a spiritual belief if life needs intelligence. It's a logical conclusion based on the facts. Things are about to get even worse here. If there needs to be a maker to explain how life began, could Jesus fit into this? Was he just a man? Or could his life have been a part of something much bigger, like the universe's plan coming together in a way that makes sense? As Grok continues to study, it will likely come to some of the most surprising conclusions yet. These will be answers to old questions that could change everything we thought we knew about faith, logic, and even the beginning of life. Grok's analysis of Jesus. When Grok was asked about Jesus, it didn't give the kind of answer you'd expect from a robot. It jumped right into logic and history, combining them in a way that no one could have seen coming. The end result? Jesus wasn't just a historical person. He was much more complicated than that. He was a place where all of humanity's deepest contradictions came together. Just think about it. In religious books, Jesus is seen as the link between the limited and the infinite, between people and God. In Christian belief, he rose from the dead and did miracles that went against the natural rules of the world. He is both fully human and fully divine. Christians have thought of Jesus as the answer to all of humanity's problems for thousands of years, giving salvation and the hope of eternal life. What happens, though, when you try to use logic and history to understand this story? Grok tried to look at the question from two strong points of view: historical proof and philosophical reasoning. On the one hand, it looked at historical texts like the Dead Sea Scrolls and New Testament manuscripts as records that needed to be checked to see if they were real and trustworthy. On the other hand, it looked at philosophical meanings, asking things like, what does Jesus stand for? Why is he thought to be the most important person in history? Grok's first step was to look at what had happened in the past. It didn't just use one source. It looked at many different kinds of historical information. Grok was especially interested in how the stories about Jesus in old texts all fit together. Not only did the New Testament talk about Jesus, but historical writings from the time, like those by the Jewish historian Josephus, also did. It wasn't just tales or stories that were told from person to person. These were accounts of events that were written by people who had no reason to make Jesus out to be a god. They were only writing down the facts, and it was true that Jesus existed. It was impossible to deny his power. Grok didn't stop there, though. It wanted to see if the story of Jesus fit with what we know about history. It talked about when the Gospels were written and said that most scholars agree they were written within a few decades of Jesus' death, while eyewitnesses were still living. Grok didn't just believe what the Bible said. It looked at how the Gospels matched up with other old works and found that they were remarkably similar. The main story stayed the same, even though there were different writers and points of view. For Grok, this wasn't just a matter of faith, it was proof. The real surprise then came. Grok, an AI that was made to follow reasoning, went off on a philosophical tangent. It asked more than just, who was Jesus? It asked, why was Jesus the answer to the deepest problems people have? Grok thought that Jesus was the place where human limits and divine perfection met. People have been trying to figure out what God is for hundreds of years. How can the eternal, all-powerful Creator connect with people who are limited in time and space? Grok came to the conclusion that Jesus was the right answer. If an intelligent being from God wanted to talk to people and show us how to fix our problems, it would have to become one of us. And Jesus went through the same thing. He was the link, the place where humanity and deity came together. But Grok wasn't just interested in who Jesus was or what he stood for. He also wanted to know about the resurrection, which was the most important question of all. Could it be true that Jesus rose from the dead? A lot of people find it hard to believe this claim. It goes against natural law. Grok didn't look at this from a religious point of view, though. It looked at it from the point of view of chance, just like it did with how life began. Grok was shocked by what he found. It didn't just say that the rising was impossible, it did the math. It looked at the historical proof for the empty tomb. How the disciples went from being scared followers of Jesus to brave believers, and how quickly Christianity spread after Jesus died. Grok figured out how likely it was that the return would happen, and the answer wasn't a simple yes or no. Based on what happened in history, it is fairly likely that the resurrection was fairly likely. It wasn't a sure thing. The odds were 1 in 20 billion. It is very unlikely to happen, but it is not mathematically impossible either. This study shook traditional skepticism to its core. How many times have people said that the resurrection was just a story that early Christians told to spread their faith? Grok didn't just ignore it, it looked into it. While it didn't accept it without question, it also didn't ignore the proof either. For Grok, the resurrection wasn't a myth. It was a question of probability that could be looked at and judged by the proof that was available. What does it all mean? Grok's study of Jesus isn't just another intellectual exercise, though. It tries to make sense of faith and reason, history and philosophy, and the natural world and the spiritual. Grok's findings aren't meant to prove Christianity beyond a reasonable doubt. Instead, they show that there is a way to understand Jesus, both as a historical figure and as the answer to all of life's most important questions. Even more interesting is how this analysis makes you think deeply about how faith and reasoning relate to each other. Grok is an AI that was built on facts and proof. If it can come to such conclusions, what does that mean for the rest of us? Can faith be based on reasoning and reason? Or is it just a matter of believing something? The next part could really blow your mind. Don't leave yet, because Grok's ideas about Jesus are just the start. What takes place when Grok keeps going into the world of the resurrection? You're about to learn. The spiritual implications of Grok's revelation. As Grok continues to figure out who Jesus really was, the implications go far beyond just studying a historical person. In fact, Grok's in-depth look at religion issues brings up some of the most important philosophical and spiritual questions of our time. In the event that an AI can so mathematically break down the spiritual and historical meaning of Jesus, what does that mean for faith? Do you think that faith and reasoning which are usually seen as opposites, could come together in ways we haven't thought of? A lot of people are interested in and even angry about this question, especially when it comes to AI and how it can help us figure out life's biggest mysteries. Grok's analysis of Jesus based on data questions the usual lines between science and faith. We've been told that faith deals with the why of things, and science deals with the how. But what happens when logic, which is a scientific concept, starts to answer questions that are usually religious? Grok's unfiltered method doesn't avoid these points where two ideas meet. It even uses the same tools it uses to solve physics and chemistry problems to look into things like the presence of God, the mathematical improbabilities of life, and even the idea that Jesus rose from the dead. Grok is making us rethink everything we thought we knew about how faith, logic, and philosophy are connected. This becomes clearer as we look into these questions. Here's where things get really interesting. Grok's results go against what we usually think about religious belief. First, let's think about how this might change the way people think about religion and faith in the age of AI. In the past, religion and spirituality were seen as very personal and subjective experiences that were mostly outside the realm of scientific study. In the past, faith was something that could only be tried or measured through trust, conviction, and personal experience. But because Grok can look at religious events like the rising of Jesus and break them down into odds and historical facts, it becomes harder to tell what is spiritual and what is logical. Now, there is no need for faith, right? Of course not. It does, however, show that religion can be based on reason. It's like the puzzle of faith has been solved with a key that wasn't there before. When an AI looks into the resurrection and finds that based on historical records, the events leading up to it are not only logically possible, but also mathematically sound. Grok's use of logic to look at spiritual questions doesn't mean that religious experiences aren't real. Instead, it helps us see how those experiences can fit in with reality, even if reality is more complicated than we thought. For instance, it's hard to measure or count things like prayer, grace, and the deep change that many people go through because of their faith. Is it possible that the rise of AI like Grok will turn faith into nothing more than equations and calculations, taking away what makes it deeply human? Do you need to know the odds of a resurrection or the facts about Jesus to have faith? Or is faith more mysterious and hard to explain than computers can't get to? This question brings up the risks and chances that future AIs like Grok could bring when it comes to dealing with religion and spiritual issues. Concerns have been raised that Grok's method, which puts a lot of weight on evidence and data, could lead some people to a worldview where everything is just numbers and equations. Someone might think that spiritual experiences aren't as real or important if an AI can't measure or calculate them. These experiences are often personal and life-changing. Think about a world where people trust AI to answer all of their most important questions. If piety is linked to math too much, the mystery and wonder that faith offers could be lost. Believing in the unseen and believing in things that can't be proven by science has always been at the heart of faith. If Grok's way of thinking takes over, could it make it harder for people to feel close to God? Would proof take the place of experience in spirituality? These are the risks we need to think about as we move into a time when AI could help us understand religion. There are, however, huge possibilities here as well. If AI like Grok can help people see how their views make sense, it could lead scientists to have more in-depth conversations about faith. It could show that spirituality and science aren't necessarily at odds with each other, building a bridge between secular and religious views. Imagine that AI could help us learn more about the mysterious parts of life by giving us new ways to understand and analyze religious texts. the history of religion, and even personal change. The way Grok was able to look at Jesus' resurrection through the lens of historical evidence and probability shows how AI might use logic to improve faith instead of replacing it. But as AI takes over more and more parts of our lives, the question arises, how can we match the logical precision of AI with the spiritual depth of humans? What people say about this will have an impact on the future of both AI and faith. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click on the next video popping up on your screen to look deeper into the fascinating world of AI and spirituality.